Standing in the middle of all this fire without flinching? What kind of person are you? His voice was rough and direct, the kind of voice shaped by years of yelling through oxygen masks. But he didn't raise it now. He just looked at her through a thin curtain of smoke drifting across the construction site. Elena Rhodes didn't blink. She stood there in the heart of a half-finished tower, now scorched by flames. Her charcoal suit, once pressed and perfect, clung with ash. Strands of hair had come loose, catching at her lips. The wind pulled at her jacket like a flag left out too long. "If I were afraid," she answered calmly, "I wouldn't be a CEO. And if I walk away now, who's left to stand here?" Dean Walker adjusted the strap of his helmet. He didn't smile, didn't turn away. But something in both of them stilled, not from confrontation, but from recognition of what they couldn't name. Because somewhere between the sirens, the groan of overheated steel, and the sting of rising smoke, a silence fell, the kind that didn't belong in places like this. So still that he could hear her heels scraping over cracked concrete. So still that she felt the ground vibrate softly beneath his boots. "You need to leave," he said. It wasn't quite a command, but it left no room for discussion. "This is my project," she replied. "I don't need a guide." He looked at her again. Not like a firefighter scanning a civilian, but like a man trying to place a face he should remember, but didn't. Not yet. Then he walked away without another word. She didn't stop him, but her eyes stayed with him. There was something in his walk, focused calm, that didn't match anyone she knew. Not the planners with their polished blueprints, not the executives with their big ideas and clean hands, not the voices in boardrooms who only showed up when the crisis was already under control. And yet, something about him did match, something she never expected to see again: his back. The way he bent down once long ago, draping his jacket over a child, shielding them from flames. A chill crept up her spine even though the air burned hot around her. No, it couldn't be. But then she saw it. Dean emerging from the burning frame of the building, carrying a limp worker in his arms, wrapped in his own jacket. Sweat and ash streaked his face, his hair damp, his features blurred by heat waves and smoke. Elena didn't move. Firefighters rushed past. Yellow tape snapped into place. Paramedics pushed through the crowd. Everything blurred except him. He looked back, just for a second. And in that second, his gaze met hers. Not curious, not surprised, but searching like a man trying to remember something long buried. She wasn't the kind of woman ruled by emotion, but something about that moment, the flames, the jacket, the way he carried the man, pulled a thread loose. "I'm sorry, I won't drop the book. I promise I'll hold on tight." A child's voice from somewhere deep in memory. She didn't know why it echoed now, but her hand instinctively tightened around her sleeve, as if still holding something small, something she'd lost a very long time ago. 3 days later, the sky above Rhodes' Edge still hadn't turned blue again. Elena Rhodes stood at the floor-to-ceiling window on the 42nd floor, staring down at the cordoned-off construction site. A white tarp covered the charred steel skeleton. Engineers had sent in their reports. Investigators combed through the wreckage, trying to trace the gas leak. The press called it an unforeseeable accident, but in Elena's mind, the only thing truly unforeseeable was the firefighter who had turned back and looked at her. She'd seen that look before, not here, long ago, in a memory wrapped too tightly in silence to ever speak of. A child being carried out of a burning building, wrapped in someone's jacket, face pressed into a stranger's chest, the smell of smoke, coarse fabric, and the steady thump of a heartbeat against her ear. She used to think that memory was just a dream, but since she'd seen Dean Walker, that dream now had a face. At Station 9, Dean sat alone by the shift rotation board. His eyes stopped at a freshly taped notice, proposed relocation of Fire Station 9 under Rhodes Development Urban Restructuring Plan. No one said anything, but the silence in the break room stretched long like a siren that wouldn't stop. Samir walked in, handed Dean a cup of coffee, and muttered without looking up, "That woman. She's the reason we might lose this place." Dean didn't answer. He just raised the cup slowly. His hand trembled not from anger, but from something heavier, uncertainty. 4 days later, they saw each other again, not in fire this time, but in the harsh, white light of a city council meeting. Elena wore a pale blue blazer. Her voice was calm, measured as she spoke of optimal zoning traffic flow efficiency, acceptable emergency response thresholds. Dean sat in the second row. When he stood to speak, he brought no slides, no stats, just a wrinkled paper map. And a voice that didn't try to persuade. It warned. What exactly is acceptable? When my mother waits 3 extra minutes for an ambulance because the closest station was moved across town, or when a little girl has an asthma attack and her dad has to drive her himself because help's too far away. Elena looked at him, but for the first time she didn't listen to the words. She looked at his arm. On his left forearm, just beneath his rolled-up sleeve, was a long, faint scar. Not obvious, but enough to make something inside her jolt. In the memory, the child's hands had trembled when they touched that same arm. The council didn't vote that night. Instead, they asked both parties to form a joint task force, a public-private team, to review all emergency response protocols. Elena nodded. Dean nodded. No one smiled. One of them represented what wasn't supposed to burn. The other, what always ran into the fire. Now they had to work together. Their first site inspection took place at a new build on the west end of the city. Elena wore a high-vis vest, white gloves, no makeup. Dean brought only a clipboard and a roll of red tape for marking risk zones. They didn't talk much, just worked, measured, observed, took notes, until she slipped. The stairs hadn't been lined with grip mats yet. She lost her footing, about to fall headfirst into a steel frame when a hand caught her from behind. Dean's hand. He caught her elbow, held her steady, not too tight, just enough to keep her from hitting the ground. And for the first time, they were closer than ever before, close enough to see every line in each other's face, every detail not visible from across a room. Elena drew in a breath, not from fear, but because the closeness triggered something. "My name is Elena. I'll hold on tight. I won't lose it." The child's voice again. Not in her head this time, but echoing right behind her ribs. She stepped back, adjusted her jacket, nodded. "Thank you, I'm fine." Dean said nothing, but his eyes for the first time betrayed confusion, maybe even recognition. They both turned away, but the dream that lived in each of their minds had started to shift. It was no longer just a memory, no longer just a story from childhood. It was something else now, something real and standing just a few steps away. The kitchen at Station 9 was usually noisy in the mornings, voices overlapping radios, humming boots on tile. But that day, when Dean stepped out of the equipment room, he saw her, Elena Rhodes, standing quietly by the coffee machine holding a paper cup. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was staring at a wall, not the duty board, not the equipment chart, but the wall of memory filled from end to end with Polaroids, handwritten notes, and crayon drawings from children they'd saved over the years. "How did you get in here?" Dean asked. His tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Elena didn't turn immediately. She reached out, touching one of the drawings, a child's sketch of a firefighter with the words, "Mr. Dean, who saved my mom." "The guy at the gate said it was okay," she replied quietly. "I just wanted to see for myself." She paused. "I've never seen any of this in a boardroom." Dean didn't answer. "Because none of it fits in a quarterly report," he said, finally. They walked together, not close, but not apart either. She kept her hands behind her back. Every room she stepped into smelled like hard work. Wet gear hanging to dry, soot-stained helmets, a cracked coffee mug with initials fading from the glaze. None of it curated. All of it real. Then the call came in. A chemical storage site had caught fire in the northern sector. Dean glanced at the alert. The name on the screen flashed red. Rhodes Material Storage Facility. Less than an hour later, the skyline beyond the northern ridge was black with smoke. A minor explosion had triggered a cascade of fires through the warehouse, a site filled with compressed gas cylinders and flammable waste. The flames moved fast. Too fast. Elena arrived on scene breathless. Not as a CEO, not with a press pass, but as someone who couldn't stop looking toward the fire. Dean was inside. "You can't go past this point," a firefighter shouted, blocking her. "My name is Elena Rhodes," she argued. "My staff is in that building." "That's why Captain Walker went back in," he said. "We told him to sit this one out." But a woman screamed her daughter was trapped near the back fence. Elena froze. She stared at the thick wall of smoke so dense it looked solid. Then something shifted, not in front of her, but inside. 10 years old, fire in her father's apartment. He wasn't home. She'd been reading about constellations, then smoke, then heat, then arms lifting her, covering her head with a heavy coat, her hands wrapped around a stranger's arm, her fingers clutching a scar. It was him. Dean Walker hadn't just saved someone today. He had saved her once, long ago, and now he was back in the fire again for someone else's child. She ran to the med tent trying to find out if anyone had radio contact. No one answered. 2 minutes passed, then 4. A second explosion closer this time. Samir reached for his gear, ready to go in. And then Dean emerged, through the smoke, carrying a girl in his arms wrapped in his coat, his face covered in ash hair, slick with sweat. Knees shaking, eyes barely open, but he walked. He walked straight out of hell. Elena didn't move. People swarmed around him. Oxygen masks, gauze. Commands shouted. Everything blurred except his face. A medic's voice floated near. "This is his 3rd admission this year. His lungs can't take many more of these." Samir turned and saw her standing there. "You didn't have to come," he said, not unkindly. "If you're here for your company's image, you should go." But Elena shook her head. Her voice barely rose above the sirens. "I'm not here for that. I'm here because this time I can't walk away again." Elena stood outside the emergency room. Her clothes were wrinkled, streaked with soot. Her hair was undone. For once, no one recognized her as a CEO, and for the first time, she didn't care. Dean was inside on oxygen. The doctors said his lungs were weaker than before, but stable. Samir sat across from her, watching. "He once told me," Samir said, voice low, "that if he ever couldn't come back from a call, he'd just want to know someone waited." Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had waited. And this time, she wasn't walking away. The explosion faded from the headlines within days. But one photo, Elena beside the ambulance, her hand resting on Dean's, made it onto every major outlet. Powerhouse CEO brought to tears by silent hero, the woman behind the empire, and the man who saved her. She gave no statements. But at the press conference the next morning, Elena didn't read from a script. She didn't wear makeup, just a wrinkled white shirt and a voice made raw from smoke and something deeper. "We build structures to stand strong," she said softly, "but what keeps us alive are people who run toward the fire when everyone else runs away. That man doesn't need me to speak for him, but I'm here today to speak for myself." She paused. Her eyes scanned the front row, the shareholders, the city officials, her mother. "I've changed," she said. "After the first fire in my life, I promised I'd never feel weak again, but now I understand. Being vulnerable isn't weakness, and strength doesn't mean being alone." 2 weeks later, Elena stepped down as CEO. She didn't leave the company, but she left the tower. Instead, she launched the Phoenix Fund, a foundation supporting first responders named after the myth of rising from ashes. Because not everyone gets to rise again, but those who do deserve to be seen. Dean recovered slowly. He didn't return to active duty, but he stayed on at the station training new recruits, revising safety protocols, reviewing fire reports with more patience than before. Sometimes Elena waited for him in the back lot, laptop in her lap. He'd show up with coffee. They didn't say much. No headlines. No hand-holding for the cameras. But people started noticing they always left together, season after season, like two people who'd waited too long to waste what they'd found. They built a small cabin by the lake, not far from the city, but far enough to hear the wind. Dean installed shelves. Elena picked paint colors. They disagreed about the kitchen layout and the sun-facing porch. Then they laughed about it. One evening, Elena brought out an old book, a reprint of the exact astronomy book she'd clutched the night of that first fire. She placed it on the table between them. I held on to this tighter than anything she said, even when the smoke was everywhere. Dean picked it up. Inside the front cover, a child's handwriting. If found, please return to Elena. He smiled. So you've been waiting for me since you were 10. She didn't answer, just leaned into his shoulder where it was quiet. They didn't say I love you, didn't promise forever, because what remained after the fire wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a title or a legacy or a perfect ending. It was this one person, still here, still breathing, still holding on. And this time, not letting go.